Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas and his Catholic faith. This is day 59. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 115 and 116 of the Prima Pars, that is, of the action of the corporeal creature and on fate. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican Province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code Summa 10. And so here we go. Article 1, whether a body can be active. Can physical things have an effect on one another? And we know just through our experience of the world that if, for example, I drop a stone onto the table, it might knock over the glasses placed there. But possibly the more interesting question is not if, but how physical things affect one another. And what Aquinas is looking to avoid in this question is a kind of occasionalism or pantheism, which would be like saying it's not the falling stone that causes the glass to tip over. Instead, that the falling stone is just an occasion for some other transcendent thing to knock over the glass. And although this sounds quite unbelievable for any sane person to hold, I would like to quote Sir Isaac Newton, who in his exposition on gravity not only could not identify its cause, but attributed the cause of moving things, of gravitating things, not to the things themselves, but to some subtle spirit. So this is from Newton in his work De Principia. He said, "But hitherto I have not been able to discover the cause of those properties of gravity from phenomena." So he takes a guess, and here is that guess. He continues, "And now we might add something concerning a certain most subtle spirit, which pervades and lies hid in all gross bodies, by the force and attraction of which spirit the particles of bodies mutually attract one another at near distances." So for Newton, it is a subtle spirit causing things to gravitate towards one another, not something on or in the things themselves, which can seem like something leaning in the direction of occasionalism or pantheism, as Dr. Ed Fazer writes. If physical objects themselves don't really do anything, then there's no point in trying to study what they do or how they do it. If physical objects do nothing and only God acts, then it would follow that physical things don't have any existence distinct from God's existence. Occasionalism would collapse into pantheism. So in our current question, what Aquinas is trying to prove is that things actually act themselves on other things, that it is actually fire that heats, that it is the stone which pushes the glass beverage off the table. Now, all of this probably sounds pretty straightforward, but it can get surprisingly complicated. So before diving into the details of the article, I'd like to translate Aquinas' terms here into a 21st century scientific context so that they are easier for us living in the 21st century to grasp. And I owe a lot of what I'm about to say to the very impressive work of Dr. Thomas McLaughlin. So let us continue with the stone, for example, held in my hand above the ground. Science says that it has a kind of gravitational potential energy. All that means, for our intensive purposes, is that the stone has the potential to fall towards the earth. But it doesn't actually have that energy of motion, what we call kinetic energy, until I let it go and it begins falling. So in this scenario, we can identify 3 things. First, the stone. Second, gravitational potential energy. And third, the possible future kinetic energy, the energy of motion. Now, in Aquinas' terms, those same 3 things are going to fall under the following 3 categories. First, the substance or informed matter thing, that's the stone. Second, the passive potential of the stone to fall. That's what we call today the gravitational potential energy. Third, the active potential of the stone to to affect other things when falling, such as to knock over a glass, what we call today kinetic energy. Now this question 115, is concerned with the third item from our list, the active potential of things, the actual or active potential in a thing to affect other things. So this article is asking, when the stone knocks over the glass, is it because of the stone or something else? And then how does it knock over the glass? And because we already dealt with the first, now zooming in on the how, St. Thomas gives us the following axiom. To act is nothing else than to make something to be in act, wherefore every agent produces its like. In layman's terms, effects happen in the affected thing. When we act upon something, that action is found in the affected thing. So the effect being shattered, let's say, caused by the stone, by the falling stone when it hits the glass beverage on the table, that effect doesn't happen in the stone or somewhere between the stone and the glass. It happens in the glass. Or as another example, when the burning torch ignites a fuse, the effect being ignited or ignition, or if we want to use the philosophical language, the potential of the fuse to ignite being actualized, that doesn't happen in the torch, nor in the medium between them, whatever is between the torch and the fuse. It happens in the fuse. Effects happen in the affected. And just as moving stones have the active potential to break glass, fire has the active potential to burn things. Simple enough, and our foundation for what will follow in the ensuing articles. Article 2, whether there are any seminal virtues in corporeal matter. And it seems like Aquinas is taking this question from the following quotation of St. Augustine, who writes, "Of all things which are generated in a corporeal and visible fashion, certain seeds lie hidden in the corporeal things of this world." And the term seeds here is not incredibly helpful for understanding Aquinas here, although it is a good analogy. So if we wanted to reword this article, it might read, are there hidden powers or capabilities in material things? Aquinas responds in the following, the natural active powers and the passive potentials which are ordered to such active powers, this is what is meant of the scope of seminal virtues. Now, I took some liberty on the translation there, but the gist of this article is simply asking if there are active and passive potentials in material things, and there are, such as the examples we gave in our previous article. Article 3, whether the heavenly bodies are the cause of what is produced in bodies here below. Is the sun the cause of what is actualized or comes to be in material things down here? Now, some of this article presupposes an outdated view of the universe, such as the celestial spheres inherited from the ancient Greeks, and so I will refer the listener to the text if they're interested in the conclusions drawn from that ancient, outdated cosmology. But on the other hand, Dionysius is quoted in this article to say, the light of the sun conduces to the generation of sensible bodies, moves them to life, gives them nourishment, growth, and perfection. And so if we take this article to ask if heavenly bodies such as the sun have a part to play in the vegetative and animal life found on earth, then we can safely say that this is indeed the case. Article 4, whether the heavenly bodies are the cause of human actions. Have you ever heard someone who swore that the lunar phases affected people's actions? Many times over my lifetime, I've heard people say that they're convinced that the moon affects the human body in some way. And I'm not saying that is true or not true, but if that is the case, the answer to this article might be in the affirmative. However, we must say that nothing in space, or even in all of the material universe, can affect directly our entirely immaterial intellect and will. Yet, because we use the body to think and choose, then insofar as something out in the world affects the body, it can be said in this way to be a cause of our thoughts and actions. Aquinas writes, it must be observed, however, that indirectly the heavenly bodies can reach the intellect and will for as much, namely, as both intellect and will receive something from the inferior powers which are affixed to corporeal organs. Article 5, whether heavenly bodies can act on the demons. The demons are entirely immaterial spirits, and so if what we mean by heavenly bodies are things like the sun and the moon, then since the material cannot reach into the immaterial, although the converse is true, such as our knowing and willing affecting our material body, then we must say that demons cannot be affected by the heavenly bodies. Article 6, whether heavenly bodies impose necessity on things subject to their action. Here St. Thomas distinguishes the effects of the sun, let's say, on you and I, versus its effects on the rocks and trees of the earth. First, does the effect of the sun impose necessity on you and I when it comes to our choices and thoughts? The answer is definitely no, but as we've said already, it can affect us indirectly by affecting our body. However, when it comes to the inanimate or vegetative things, let's say, the sun may be said to impose a kind of necessity insofar as it is the cause of our planet necessarily orbiting it, as well as the reason for plants' inevitable growth, all other things being equal. And with that, we move on to question 116 on fate. Article 1, whether there be such a thing as fate. This question follows naturally from question 115, the previous one, because in the past and even today, some have believed that the arrangement of the stars or planets are somehow the cause of people's destinies. And since this is a popular mistake, Aquinas probably feels that he needs to address it here. The key takeaway from the entirety of question 116 is that although God's providence is certain, without any infringement on free choice, please see episode 12 for more on that. It is without a doubt that our lives are not determined by the stars. Aquinas writes in response to this article, inasmuch as all that happens here below is subject to divine providence, as being preordained and as it were forespoken, we can admit the existence of fate, although the holy doctors avoided the use of this word on account of those who twisted its application to a certain force in the position of the stars. Hence Augustine says, if anyone ascribes human affairs to fate, meaning thereby the will or power of God, let him keep his opinion, but hold his tongue. Hold his tongue meaning don't use the word fate to describe what you mean by the certainty of God's providence, because listeners may misunderstand you. Article 2, whether fate is in created things. In this article, we get a distinction between the terms providence and fate, how they can be used as to refer to different things. St. Thomas says, firstly, as being in God himself, the ordering of the effects is called providence. But if we consider this ordering as being in the mediate causes ordered by God to the production of certain effects, thus it has the nature of fate. For example, God has ordered that the movement of inanimate bodies take the path of least action, what physicists call the principle of least action. This is an ordering in them, and therefore we can call it their fate. Fate can also refer to the immediate causes as ordered by God in the execution of his providence, just broadly speaking. As St. Thomas writes, fate is worked out when divine providence is served by certain spirits, whether by the soul or by all nature itself, which obeys him. And again, for how this is in no way a violation of free will, I would check out episodes 12 and 13 of this podcast. Article 3, whether fate is unchangeable. Fate is unchangeable in the way that God's providence is unchangeable and certain. But Aquinas will make sure to remind us here that some secondary causes, like us, God is the first and primary cause of all things, we do not choose or act necessarily, but contingent upon our free choice. Yet even free choice is itself included within God's providence. Aquinas puts the two thoughts together in the following words. We must therefore say that fate, considered in regard to secondary causes, is changeable, but as subject to divine providence, it derives a certain unchangeableness, not of absolute, but of conditional necessity. In this sense, we say that this conditional is true and necessary. If God foreknew that this would happen, it will happen. Article 4, whether all things are subject to fate. Aquinas gives us a brief response to this question, saying, as stated above, fate is the ordering of secondary causes to effects foreseen by God. Whatever therefore is subject to secondary causes is subject also to fate. But whatever is done immediately by God, since it is not subject to second causes, neither is it subject to fate, such as creation, the glorification of spiritual substances, and the like. So some things, as ordered by God's providence, can be considered fated, again like inanimate objects following the path of least action. Other things, like the creation of the world out of nothing and the glorification of man and angels and the beatific vision, are not called fated, since they come immediately from God, and are neither a disposition already existing in things nor the result of secondary causes acting on them. And so in this way, Aquinas does not apply the term fate to them. And that is all for questions 115 and 116 of the Prima Pars, that is, of the action of the corporeal creature and on fate. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.